Griffin just had a much needed bath. I've done some organic fertilizer out here in the back garden, and he managed to find his way into it a couple of times. Holly's down here below me, and I put a photo on Instagram today of her trying to lay out there in it. God, they love that organic fertilizer. Fertilized this morning, and all the shrubs, trees, perennials, everything. And supposed to get some rain tomorrow, so hopefully that'll get it down in the ground. I try to do it right before it rains. You'll seen that video by the time this video goes up. I'm shooting this on Friday. Welcome to HortTube. My name is Jim Putnam. This is the garden question and answer video that I do most Sundays. You can ask gardening questions down below this video in the comment section, and I pick from those each week. You guys continue to ask great questions. The Learn to Garden video series, which is over on my website, I added a video to yesterday about screening plants, just about picking screening plants, spacing, just lots about screening plants, about how to think about going about using plants as, to screen your neighbors or wind or whatever it is you're trying to screen or hide, and maybe you're hiding something in your own garden. That video went up on that Learn to Garden series yesterday, and I filmed a couple more this week, which will be going up in short order for those of you who have bought that. There'll be some good content, I hope, this week going up on that, and I think there's, before the end of the week, there's 12, 13 videos over there at this point. There's a $25 off coupon code down at the bottom of the video if you're interested in that series. Let's see. I put up, I think, 5 videos or something this week, including the fertilizing video that I just talked about. If you guys aren't following me over on Instagram, or you are on Instagram but you're not following me over there, I do post there pretty frequently, and sometimes I'll get a question about an update on a plant that I may have put into this garden and I haven't shown it on the channel in a while. It might be a photo on Instagram of it at some point. And then put up a video on the Garden Plants with Jim Putnam YouTube channel, which you can just subscribe to over there if you want to. That's just another YouTube channel that I have. This is HortTube with Jim Putnam. Is just all things horticulture, and then the Garden Plants channel is just individual plant varieties, descriptions of those. So there you go. Enough of that. Let's get to some gardening questions that you guys asked from last week. Pretty much every year about this time I start getting questions about sunshine ligustrum thinning. Mine is not this year, but last year it did. These privet, it's a sterile gold privet for those of you who don't know what it is. There's a lot of them have been sold. They're just literally, there's so many of them out there in the world, and they're just a bright pop of gold color. They're kind of tardily deciduous. They actually we call them evergreen, but there's a lot of shrubs that we call evergreen that actually just carry their leaves through the winter, and then the new leaves push them off. And so it was as if it's evergreen, and they're just late, but with losing their leaves. That Empress of China dogwood out in the front garden is kind of that way. It's just in the process, and it's losing its leaves a little earlier this year, so it's thin. I think from that freeze, it ended up dropping its leaves a little bit early. So it's done what that sunshine ligustrum did over here last year, which it dropped its leaves before the new leaves came, and I thought this thing was supposed to be evergreen, and it just didn't line up properly. So that happens. I don't know what causes it. I've had this conversation with a lot of people, in this business, and nobody can figure out why just randomly one will drop all of its leaves in February or March, a month and a half before it starts to put on new growth, and then the next year not do it. And that's what mine has done. Mine's full and looks great over there. I can see it from here. Let's see. So somebody has, it doesn't really matter what the plants are, but they have some abelia and some spirea, and the leaves get down in them that fall off the trees and kind of fill them up a bit. And the person was asking if they should remove some of them. That's one of those really things that comes down to how many are there. I mean, if it's there is a point where there's too many. So yeah, you may need to be thinning them out. In fact, if you're asking me the question, it probably is, it probably is the yes that you need to clean some of them out. You definitely don't need to clean all of them out. I've got some, we have a lot of leaves that fall off this oak back here. You guys have seen them in the videos because I'm just leaving them in place. I mean, it doesn't look the best, for a few months, but you know, I can hear literally right now, I can hear the robins back here flipping those leaves over, looking for food. They love them back here. So it's drawing some wildlife in. But there's a couple places where they're a little too thick, and before I mulch, I'll definitely pull some of them back. But my guess is if there's enough that you're asking the question, probably that's too many, and you need to pull some of them out probably before you do any other kind of mulching. Somebody's got a diseased Coosa dogwood. They had sent it off, and it had a couple different diseases. They wanted to know if they should replant another one. No, I probably wouldn't. You know, I would probably move over to maybe a red bud or something, you know, completely different genus. I wouldn't, you know, just that's generally the rule of thumb. If you got something that's diseased, you want to move to to something else. But you might want to move to a red bud or something that will take similar part shade conditions. I don't know what the conditions were for this tree. If this Coosa dogwood was in a ton of sun, then you need to pick something that gets a similar size for sun. But if it's in a part shade spot, maybe a red bud would be a good replacement for it. But no, I wouldn't come back with the same thing back into a spot with a disease. More than likely, your Coosa dogwood was under some sort of stress that caused it to get these disease issues that may not happen to the next one. So I'm not saying like it's 100% sure that the next one you put there is going to get it. That's not necessarily true, but it is possible. And it may be similar stressed conditions, you know, if it's too wet or too something in that space. Okay, let's see. Holly got a ton of well wishes last week. She did not have a good week last week. Went to the vet. She's not been to specialist. That's coming up the first of this week. She's got 2 big lumps under her neck right here that we're going to get checked out this next week. Let's see. So, of course, continue to get tons of questions about pruning damaged plants from the cold, and that video will be going up this week. I've got maybe 6 things out here that are damaged from that cold in some various ways, and I'm going to show how I'm going to prune those back. But really, I'm just going to cut back to the new growth. You know, I'm starting to see where the new growth, where it's alive on the stems. I'm just going to cut back to there. So I just spoiled the whole video right there. But yeah, this week is when I'm going to do the pruning on my damaged plants. Maybe a little early for those of you who that are further north. But I'm seeing where the new growth is. I'm seeing where the plant's alive. That's where I'm going to cut them back to. Okay. Somebody, of course, I mean, it just continues again to be lots of damaged plants. Somebody has frozen soft caress mahonia. Somebody else had indigo flare mahonia. Wanted to know if they're going to come back from browning and the leaves dropping off. It totally depends. I mean, those soft caress mahonia can actually root sucker. Actually, pretty much all mahonia can root sucker. So seeing everything there looking dead doesn't necessarily mean the roots are dead, and it wouldn't surprise me at all if you get root suckers that will come up and they're totally alive. I'm going to give those probably until sometime almost late May before I make that decision. And I know that's a long time in Dallas, Texas. That seems like it'd be a long time to wait for something, but I've had things at the nursery that took winter damage that, you know, it would be a month after our average last frost date, May 15th, May 20th, we'd start to see growth on something. And then it grew pretty quickly, you know, when it came back from that. So anything you have that you just literally trying to decide whether it's alive or dead, I'm going to leave it for a while, unless it's in such a high profile space that waiting for something for that long to recover is just not something you're willing to do. You know, at that point, you can pop them out of the ground and put them in a container, wait for the, you know, whatever new plant you're planting there, you can use that container to put them in and see, you know, put them in a part shade place, you know, keep them moist and see what happens. Maybe they leaf out in the container and then you can replant them into the landscape later. So that's an idea as well if you're needing to get something there pretty quick. Somebody asked me about, am I pruning my blueberries? Because I'm doing all this pruning in the garden. The blueberries just aren't big enough. Typically on blueberries, you just prune old canes all the way to the ground. And so, you know, you'll prune maybe 20 to 25% of the oldest canes, you know, literally all the way down to the ground, and then leave the rest of the plant. You don't do any general top pruning typically, unless there's some crazy branch maybe, but for the most part, that's the way you prune them. Mine just aren't old enough to justify that. Usually it's 3-4 years down the road before you're doing any of that kind of pruning. So it'll be another year or so before I'm pruning blueberries. But if you have old ones, that's the way you go about it. You can see the difference where the oldest stems, they have a different look down at the bottom, at the base, and those are the ones you want to cut out. The blueberries perform the best on wood that's like 2-3 years old. Once the wood is 4 or 5 years old, you get a decline in the amount of berries that you get. But that's the way they're pruned. Same person has 2 in one container, wanted to know if they could go ahead and divide them, but they're flowering. No, probably best not to divide them while they're flowering. I think you'll definitely lose some flowers, probably lose some berries. The best time to have done it probably would have been 2 or 3 months ago while they were completely dormant. At this point, I think you'd sacrifice some berries, but if you're sitting there looking at it and going, I can't wait another 10 months, or the plants are not going to, the plants are going to ultimately be damaged from waiting, then you might just go ahead and do it anyway, and sacrifice some berries to save the plants. So I don't know what they look like. Okay, somebody asked about using, so I put up the chipper video, chipping up the pruned pieces off all the plants. I'm chipping them up and using them as mulch in the landscape just to refeed the plants. Got a comment on that video that it uses too much nitrogen, and that's one of those ongoing things. And there's a question coming up about that. I've talked about this putting wood chips out, and you'll hear frequently that it takes nitrogen for those wood chips to break down. It'll take it from the easiest source, so it might off-color your plants, take the nitrogen from your plants, or take all the available nitrogen so your plants can't get any. And I've said before, it's a little bit overblown. The nitrogen that it uses, it quickly gives back. It doesn't like hoard it forever. So it's a little bit overblown, but some plants are probably more sensitive to it than others. So I'm not going to pile lots of wood chips up around plants, but the little bit that I showed in that video where I'm throwing out a handful of chipped up wood pieces into the bed, it's just not going to cause that type of damage. But on this question was, can you use rose clippings through the chipper and use them that way? Yes, again, as long as the roses were disease-free. You definitely have to say that with roses. Roses get so many different problems. So yes, as long as they were clean, disease-free, you definitely want to wear gloves, because when I don't care what chipper, if it's that little cheap electric chipper that I have or a gas chipper, best chipper in the world, when a chipper grabs something and pulls it in, it whips it all over the place. And so be prepared for your rose stems with their long thorns to be whipped about. So make sure you're clothed well for that. But yeah, absolutely, use them for sure, but just be careful, because you're going to come out bloody for sure. I get the comments. I've got so many things. One of the videos that went up were all the things that are flowering here in February, and of course, and people are like, "It's snowing here. I wish that I can't believe that you're able to get things flowering at that time." Well, we're the ones that'll be jealous when in August it's 85 where you are and it's 98 here. So yeah, we have an advantage in the spring and in the fall, probably with an extended season of nice weather. But our summers are pretty tough. So there's a reason that people picked the north a long time ago, pre-air conditioning. It can be pretty miserable. So. And the gardens up there tend to stay a little bit fresher into late summer once they do get going. Let's see. Somebody has a Fire Island hydrangea, and it hasn't bloomed since they got it. I guess that just means last year it didn't bloom because it was like the fall before that or something. They bought it with some flowers on it, planted it. Last year it didn't bloom. That's a Hydrangea macrophylla, and there's a ton of reasons macrophyllas might not bloom. Macrophyllas are the traditional blue or pink ones. This Fire Island one is a kind of a variegated flower, kind of multicolored. I think there's several in that Fire Island series. Anyway, first of all, it said it was in full sun, and most of the time Hydrangea macrophyllas need part shade unless you were way north. And if you're way north, typically the flower buds can get damaged in the winter because it gets so cold. So I'm just kind of wondering if it was in too much sun, or if it got pruned in the wintertime. Those are ones you definitely don't want to prune in the wintertime. Or it was planted and it was new. Frequently, that's the case. You put something in, it's not going to, in its best year is not going to be year one on pretty much anything you plant. So that's perennial. So it could be any of those reasons, but that's definitely one you don't want to be pruning in the winter. And full sun may be a bit too much. Just kind of monitor that during the season. Somebody has a north-facing bed and it's wet during the winter time, of course, and wanted to know if they should amend it for drainage. Be careful amending with any kind of organic material in those types of situations. So let's say I say pine bark soil conditioner is great for drainage. It can actually cause it to end up being wetter in the future as it breaks down. So organic material is probably not the thing to use. You can use it like expanded clay. There's some products that you can probably, almost any garden center has some sort of expanded clay product. You could till that in. It's basically just a heated clay pellet. That might help to create some drainage in that area. The other thing is just to pick plants that will take those changeable conditions. And I've always talked about that northeast side being a good place, a good candidate to use native plants. Because that's a spot that can be dry in the summer and hot, and then moist and even frozen in the wintertime. So lean on native plants. If you're going to amend it with some sort of expanded shale product or expanded clay product. Garden centers will know what I'm talking about. Let's see. So somebody had wood chips down in a bed, and a contractor came along and I guess trenched a line in or something like that and mixed all those wood chips into the ground. And I've always talked about trying not to bury a whole lot of wood in the ground, because it gets trapped and you can cause anaerobic conditions. If you ever pull back landscape fabric after it's been down for a while and smell that smell that's under it, that kind of rotting smell, that's what anaerobic soil smells like. It can also be created by wood being mixed deep enough into the soil that it doesn't have light to break down, and it just gets kind of funky. I doubt this is enough to cause you any long-term problem. If you wanted to, add a little bit of nitrogen, not something I normally recommend, but if you wanted to get, some sort of a little bit of fertilizer and fertilize that area, just to make sure it has enough nitrogen to break down. I think it'll be self-correcting in some period of time. Don't get in there and compact it down real tight. I imagine they couldn't compact it as well because that wood is down there. Hopefully it's got enough air that it can break down. And I think within some period of 6 months or something, most of it would be broken down. But I do try to avoid that if I can. I try to pull back. Bark isn't as big of a deal, but the bark, the outer parts of trees, but the inside parts of trees, again, it's not the end of the world. But if you mix a lot of it into an area, you can really turn your soil funky in a hurry. But a few pieces of wood is not a panic situation. So I want to balance the scale there. A lot is a problem. Okay. Let's see, somebody is trying to grow Echinacea down in South Savannah, and they plant it and then it turns black. They lose them all the time. There are a couple diseases that the aster family can get. Aster's yellow is one of those, and I get questions about aster's yellow all the time. That's another one of those things where you don't keep coming back with asters. Start using salvias or something else in those spaces. If you do have a disease problem, move to something that's in a different genus for a while. Maybe try to come back to them later. That wasn't the question. This person is asking. They're talking about, I've amended the soil. I've done this. I've done that. The best Echinacea or coneflowers that are in this garden are out by the road in a space that was never amended. Okay, some of these native plants don't really like high amounts of organic material, or really, really overdone organic material. So my black-eyed Susans and my coneflowers back here in my compost and wood chip prepped, and man, this soil's black, and look at all these earthworms. They're this tall. And the coneflower out by the street, planted in the solid clay that, you know, you have to use a pickaxe to dig in, is literally 5 feet tall. The last 2 summers, so you know, keep that in mind. I'd put some of those. You can put some of these native plants into the native soil, and just mulch to keep the weeds away from them. Mulch lightly to keep the weeds away from them, and keep some moisture in place, and walk away. That may actually be your issue, and I'm reading into that because it talked about sometimes the more effort, the worse things get, which is, you know, we can definitely love things to death. Okay, so somebody asked, I talked about great botanic gardens across the country. Some people added some to that list, and I appreciated it. Some of them, I should have said, you know, when I was winging a list, and I had a pretty good list, but I definitely missed a few of the really great gardens in the country. Somebody's driving from Jacksonville, Florida, to Richmond, Virginia, and wanted to know if there's any gardens along that trip. Magnolia Plantation is a little off the beaten path in Charleston. You know, you have to get off 95 a little bit, but that's a good one down in Charleston, South Carolina. And then the Cape Fear Botanic Gardens in Fayetteville, North Carolina. It's literally right on the interstate, basically, and it's on the Cape Fear River. That garden is flooded a couple times during a couple of hurricanes. It took a couple of hits. But it's a great camellia collection, an incredible children's garden there with some interesting structures, play structures, kind of a fun place if you have kids, I think. It's a good garden. And then of course, again, I mentioned last week that Lewis Ginter in Richmond is a fantastic garden. Norfolk's not really close to Interstate 90, not that close to Interstate 95, but the Norfolk Botanic Garden is one I didn't mention last week, and it's a good one as well. Let's see. So somebody wants to do the wood chip process like I've talked about, you know, putting out wood chips and then letting them break down and then planting after the soil's been improved. But they want to do some planting this spring. Wanted to know if they could then wood chip around the things once they get to the point where they can do the wood chip thing. Put them around those plants that they're going to plant this spring. No, I would just segregate the two things. And, you know, the things you're going to plant this spring, just use some compost, you know, a small amount of compost. You don't have to go, you know, crazy amending the soil, and then just do your regular mulch. And then areas that you're not planting this spring would be the areas that I would do the wood chips when you get around to that process. And just separate the two things entirely so you don't bury those new plants in the wood chips like I just talked about. Somebody asked me, I don't answer a lot of questions about chemicals. I get lots of chemical questions. I don't answer a lot of them, but I thought I'd answer this one. Somebody using Scott's weed and feed and wanted to know if those chemicals were bad for the soil life. Was it Mecroprop and 2,4-D, I think, are the two chemicals they use to kill weeds in that Scott's weed and feed. And then, of course, there's a fertilizer component to it as well, an inorganic fertilizer component in there. That's an interesting question because that Mecropop's been around, I think, since the 60s. And the 2,4-D has been around since like the 40s. It was used for other things. I think it was developed during World War II, and we probably were defoliating some forest or something like that with it. Those chemicals have been around for a long time. They've been through a lot of testing. They're chemicals that break down pretty quickly in the environment. They've stood the test of time. We've lost a lot of chemistry to regulation. A good thing. You know, they continue to monitor these chemicals, you know, for, you know, not just leading up to them being released, but well into the future. You know, they continue. And so I've seen more chemistry almost disappear. By chemistry, I mean fungicides, insecticides, herbicides, you know, disappear than we have added. Griffin had to get his voice in here over the years. And so, again, these ones that have stood the test of time like that are probably reasonably safe. I know there was a study at UNC Chapel Hill years ago about 2,4-D having some issues. So you can just read those. There's two chemicals in there that are the actual herbicides and you can read for yourself, the data, that people have collected over time. I do know they break down. They're supposed to break down in the environment. I'm not using them. I don't want to. I don't want to, drown the garden in or a herbicide in order to create a monoculture that exists nowhere else on Earth except for the lawn. It's a. So anyway, I'm not using them. I think those two chemicals, have been around for a long time. They've been tested for a long time. So they're probably safer than most at this point. So that's how I'll say that. Somebody has holes in their Stellar Ruby magnolia leaves. Wanted to know if they should. I think they wanted to spray it with dormant oil. Is what they wanted to spray it with. I think just monitor it. New foliage is coming soon that's going to cover up the old leaves. They'll probably shed a few of the old leaves at that time. If not, they'll shed a few in the fall. Going into fall. I'm just not going to worry about it at this point. Whatever was chewing on it's probably long gone. At this point, it may have been a leaf cutter bee or something like that, which, I get the leaf cutter bees cutting out little circular pieces out of the red bud back here. I don't know what it was, but it's probably, if you're not seeing any sign of it, it's probably long gone. And as long as the new foliage on it's clean, no big deal. Generally, a lot of times by the time we see something, it's already passed. Okay, somebody asked if Viburnum awabuki is the same as Shindo Viburnum. They've seen photos of Shindo Viburnum online, and they look fresh and beautiful and lush, and they're down in Florida in Zone 9, and they're half defoliated and they have disease problems. It's the same plant, and I've seen that when I've gone down. I spent a lot of time in Florida, especially in the last 2 or 3 years. We go down there a lot, and the Shindo Viburnums I see don't look that great. They're zone 7 to 9, and I've seen somebody said 7 to 11 or something like that. And I don't know, that may be the case, but 7 to 9 is what I've always put on the screen when I talk about Shindo Viburnum. But I know down in what looks like more humid, hot, conditions without winter, they do seem to get some leaf spot issues and some thinning on them. So, but up here in Raleigh, they look absolutely fantastic. So I don't know if that's winter related, the shorter season, slightly less humidity. I don't know what's going on there, but I've seen the same thing down in Florida. They don't look as good. But it is the same. It is the same plant. And the lush photos that you're seeing are probably up here in my area in South Carolina, North Carolina, Georgia. Somebody has a 6-inch Liriope plants. They want to know if they can cut them into like 6 plants, get real greedy and see how many they can get out of each one, or should they just like divide them in 2 or 3? If you're going to plant them back in the ground, I would divide them only into like 2 or 3 plants and keep a fairly chunky piece going back in the ground. We would have divided a gallon container, a 6-inch full Liriope. We would have cut it into 6, 7, 8 pieces at the nursery when we were dividing them, but we were putting them back into a container in a very controlled media that was well drained. We were fertilizing it. We were making sure it wasn't overwatered. So that little teeny chunk of Liriope was well taken care of in that container environment in a nursery. But in the ground, those little chunks some of them will probably rot, some of them will fail in some way or another. So again, into the ground, don't get greedy. If you want to put them in containers and grow them out for a little while, you can just go to town cutting them up into small pieces. Let's see. Last question for this week. I think this is like 21 or 22. Somebody's got some overgrown gold mop cypress, and they're larger than the plants that are behind them. This is one of those funny ones. I've had people come to the farmer's market when I sold at the farmer's market. They wanted the small gold mound cypress, the small gold mop cypress, and not the big gold mop cypress. It's the same plant. I've seen them. There's one at Juniper Level that's probably 20 feet tall. There's some down at Swift Creek Nursery where I've shot some videos that are 15, 18 feet tall. And then I've seen people that keep them sheared off and they're about 18 inches tall. All the same plant. But the ones they have, they're taller than the plants that are behind them, and they cut them down to a point, and then they grow back really quickly. And keep that in mind. I've said this in some of the pruning videos. When you take a 6-foot tall plant and you cut it down to 4 feet, it still has a 6-foot tall plant root system on it. And so it comes back out and grows like crazy. So their question was, can they cut them hard? Yeah, you can absolutely go out there and just butcher those things. I thought I had killed one at the old house. I had one similar situation where I had it next to the deck rail on the back deck at the old house, and it became 8 feet tall over time. And I decided one day, I said, whatever happens, happens. I cut it down to like 3 feet tall. It was like that for a little while. So it won't be the prettiest thing for several months, but it'll come back out of it. It's amazing how much those things can recover from being cut hard. And regardless, I always think about things like that. If it's making you miserable, you either cut it down to 3 feet and hope for the best, or you cut it down to 3 feet and they die, and it's an opportunity, to put something else in that's going to make you happier anyway. So, you know what I mean? That's kind of the way I think about that. If it's making you miserable, go for it, and whatever happens, happens. So thank you guys very much for following along. Again, ask gardening questions down below this video. There's a few garden plants videos for the garden plants with Jim Putnam channel, which is linked down below the video in the where I write things down. In the description of the video is a link to that garden plants channel, and also a link to the Learn to Garden video series with that $25 discount code. Thanks for watching.